Okay, I'm your public health person, and the first thing I am thinking about watching you all sit here for this length of time is, would you all please pump your ankles a little bit? I don't want anybody to be throwing a blood clot while they're attending the session. It's a long time to sit. Okay, so why are we concerned about the effect of unconventionals really on health? Mainly because it hasn't been studied. We don't know what the effects are going to be. There have been some studies on the air and on the water. There was an air study done out in Colorado, showed problems. I'm sorry, Texas. They did one in Colorado too, but the big one was in Texas. And then there was another one on water done in Wyoming. And again, it showed problems, but they never made a connection between the problems they saw in the air and the water compared to what the health effects were. There was no connection there. And I just want to start by saying, we're not the only ones concerned about the health effects. There are tons, and this is just a few, of the societies having to do with medicine that are saying, taking a stand, saying we shouldn't be doing this until we study it. And like I said, this is just a handful of the ones that have taken this stand. Okay, water contamination is a possibility, but air contamination is an absolute certainty. And the problem is that this industry will take place in people's backyards. This isn't something where it's located out in some industrial area. It will be all over this area. And it will be close to schools, daycare centers, hospitals. Just the truck trips alone. Now this comes out of the most recent ESCAs, the ones that we all sweated over the last few months to get our comments in on. This shows that for just one well, now mind you, a pad can have anywhere up to 20 wells on it, but just one well involves 1,979 truck trips, and that is right out of the DEC's DSCAs. Now you multiply that times the number of wells on a pad, and you realize we're talking about a tremendous increase in traffic. And the VOCs combined, the volatile organic compounds combined with the nitrogen oxides in the air in the presence of sunlight and form ozone. Now ozone is great when it's really high up, but when it's ground level, it causes problems. Ground level ozone can burn the deep alveolar tissue of your lungs, causing it to age prematurely. Chronic exposure leads to respiratory diseases, and is particularly damaging to children, to active young adults who are spending time outdoors, and to the aged. And when ozone combines with very small particulate matter, you get smog, and there's a definite relationship between levels of smog and emergency room admissions. This is Sublette County, Wyoming. I think Bill or Joe, one of them made a reference to the air pollution in Wyoming. Their air pollution in an area where they only have 2 people per square mile is as high or greater than the summertime level of air pollution in Los Angeles. Now, the gas companies will say, well, there's unique factors here. They have some inversion factors, and their snowpack kind of cooks the ozone. Well, we have inversion factors in New York State as well, and we have lakes that reflect the sunlight that can cook the ozone. Diesel. Joe mentioned about all the 24/7 running of diesel engines, and of course we've got those thousands of trucks. So if you have asthma or any other kind of respiratory disease, heart disease, or allergies, you're going to have worse symptoms from all this increased diesel. And also short-term exposure has some temporary health effects where it can cause lightheadedness, a lot of neurological symptoms. I'm going to talk briefly about a person named Laura Amos, because I think her story points up a lot of the potential problems that you face with some of these chemicals. And this is by now switching to water. Okay, in May of 2001, her water well blew up. There was gas drilling going on nearby. The well was obviously contaminated. The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission came in and started doing water tests. They said, you just got some methane, it will go away, there's nothing to worry about. So they stopped testing in August of that year. Over time, Laura became sicker and sicker and sicker. And finally, they discovered she had an adrenal gland tumor, and they removed her adrenal gland. After that, she was pretty angry because she felt there was a connection here, and she started a letter writing campaign. And because of the fuss that she raised, in January of 2004, Colorado Oil and Gas Commission tested her water again. This time they found problems. They related it to the gas drilling. They gave them a notice of violation. They never fined them. In August of 2004, there was an article that Laura Amos read, and she said, holy mackerel, this article is describing a chemical called 2BE that's used in gas drilling that causes this very rare type of adrenal tumor that I had removed. So she starts inquiring as to whether or not the gas company had used 2BE, and the gas company flatly stated they did not use 2BE. Well, it turned out they had used 2BE. And at that point, the story ends. Because you never hear more about Laura Amos, because, and the assumption is, she made an out-of-court settlement. And if you make an out-of-court settlement with a gas company, there will be something called a non-disclosure agreement in it, which is basically a gag order. You are not allowed to talk about what happened and what the settlement was. And so we really don't have any more information. But I will tell you that back in May of 2001, Laura Amos had a 6-month-old baby that she breastfed for a year and a half after that. So that child was being bathed in the water that had the 2BE. When you're bathing in it, you are also inhaling the gases being given off by the water. And she was being fed 2BE through her mother's breast milk. We don't know if anything's happening with that child, because like I said, there's we assume a non-disclosure order, and we just don't know anymore. Some things about 2BE. It's highly soluble. A lot of these chemicals are highly soluble. They'll dissolve in water. And they might not be detectable through odor or through taste. So a person can be consuming this and not know they're consuming something that's bad for them. It also can easily leach into the groundwater, and it can remain entrapped underground for years and eventually migrate to a domestic well or to a surfacing spring. And to date, the aerobic biodegradation, the breakdown products of 2BE have not been identified, and the chemistry to detect them is rare. It's very hard for them to detect this chemical. It's rapidly absorbed through all 3 pathways: the skin from bathing, the lungs from when you're showering, breathing in the vapors, and through the GI tract. And it has multiple health effects. They can't rule out prenatal damage. It's been classified as possibly causing cancer, and it has sensitive populations. Now, most chemicals have what we call a sensitive population, a certain group of people who are more likely to experience negative health effects than other groups. Sometimes the group, it can have to do with your age. I think we all saw that recently when we had the H1N1 outbreak. It was the younger people who tended to get the H1N1, or the serious consequences of H1N1 more than the older people. So it can be age, it can be pregnant women, it can be specific health conditions, or even have to do with people with certain types of activities. No cumulative exposure studies have been done that evaluate the simultaneous impact of ingesting, inhaling, and having topical exposure to this chemical all at once. And then on top of it, there's no research having to do with not only those 3 ways of the chemical entering the body, but add to that the other chemicals that person is being exposed to through this whole drilling process. This is something that follows with Bill and what Joe was saying about water treatment plants not being able to treat this. This is the Monongahela River. There is bromide in the gas drilling wastewater. The sewer treatment plants could not treat it, and so this bromide was then going into the Monongahela, which further downstream is picked up by the city of Pittsburgh, goes through their water treatment plant where chlorine is added as a disinfectant, and the combination of chlorine and bromide causes a carcinogenic agent. Now, water tests. People are really surprised usually when they find out how much a water test costs. So you want to know whether or not your water is safe. To do the tests that are recommended by the Pennsylvania State University, their list of the tests that should be done if drilling is in your area, the package is $875 if it's done at Microbac in Cortland. As far as municipal water supplies, your routine water testing that is done is only on bacteria. They do not test for chemicals. Normally, chemicals are only tested for every 3 years because that kind of testing is so expensive. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that families with private drinking water wells in gas production areas should test their wells on a regular basis for certain chemicals that they're concerned about. But the concern about this is that who can afford that? You can't expect that people are going to be regularly paying $875 to have their private wells tested. Now there's other concerns besides, you hear a lot about the water in the air, but public health or population health really involves the whole environment in which we live. Our health status is determined 30% genetics, 10% the health care we receive, but 60 to 70% of our health is based on the social and environmental conditions and our personal behaviors. So you have other problems such as flowback water that gets misted into the air into the air for evaporation. These chemicals can settle into the soil, get into our food chain. This leads to bioaccumulation, where these chemicals then accumulate in the body. Right now there is no safety inspection in place for testing agricultural products grown in gas drilling areas. You have the effect of noise. Noise causes increased blood pressure even when people are sleeping. It can cause something called vibroacoustic disease, which is mainly neurological type symptoms, also some respiratory symptoms. I don't even have light on a slide, but light is another issue. We have lack of social cohesion. If you go down right now to the town of Dimmock, we happen to have personal friends down there, and unfortunately they're not on the side I wish they were on, but the issue of gas drilling has literally torn that community apart. And so it can affect that sense of social cohesion, which they have tied into heart disease rates. And then there's the social psychological health effects, things like the increased crime, the drug violations, fear and stress, sense of community, crime rates. This is Garfield County, Colorado. All of their crime rates at least doubled, sometimes tripled, except for murder. That stayed zero, luckily. Stress. People experience stress because of increased traffic, increased noise, increased light, increased fear related to crime, increased fear related to their water and air quality. And then on top of that, you add problems such as increased housing costs. In Garfield County, that's in Colorado, housing costs were 35% below comparable housing in the Denver metropolitan area back in 2002. By 2008, housing costs were the same or higher than the Denver area. So housing is difficult to find now. 5% vacancy rate compared to a 25% vacancy rate. Yep. Homes exploding due to the methane migration. That causes anxiety. Radioactivity. We don't know a lot about the radioactivity yet. We know that it varies widely from one well to another. We know that in Cortland County, we have some of the highest rates of radon in the state. So we're very concerned. Why this thing's sensitive? So we're very concerned about radon pathways being opened up into homes. And then we're also concerned about the radioactive waste getting into the ground or surface water. And then we're concerned about something called endocrine disruption. And this is a new and growing area of medical research. It has to do basically with the altering of the way our glands work. And our glands regulate our body. And there are some pretty strong suggestions in the research that all of these different conditions could be tied to endocrine disruption. And the chemicals that are used in hydrofracking, a lot of them are endocrine disruptors. And then there's the issue of the susceptibility of children. I think of the children in this situation as being our canaries in the mine. They're more vulnerable to environmental hazards because they eat, drink, and breathe more than adults on a pound-for-pound basis. And on top of it, they live lower to the ground. And a lot of the gases that we're talking about are heavier than air, and they go low to the ground. And of course, the chemicals that eventually settle out of the air or get misted in the air in some situations eventually settle to the ground. And you've got the little ones down there who are picking things up, putting them in their mouths, and breathing all the dust and everything that gets stirred up low to the ground. They're also not able to metabolize some of the toxic chemicals, as well as adults do. And fetuses and young children are in a particularly critical period of development when these exposures can have profound negative effects. Now, what studies have been done? Garfield County Public Health Department had discovered a lot of different problems going on. What really was the impetus for them to get involved with doing a health impact study was the complaints of the population there. They made an agreement with the Colorado School of Public Health to do a health impact assessment. The main finding of the assessment was that the residents would be affected by chemical exposures, accidents, emergencies, and stress-related community changes. And their recommendation was to focus on the air contamination. They were supposed to do a long-term study to look at the actual health effects, what changes in health happen to the population in Garfield County. Unfortunately, with the encouragement of the gas companies, the legislature decided not to fund any more of the study. And before the health impact study was even completed, it was ended. And so we really do not have a complete study from that, but there were some interesting things that came out of it. But again, no direct cause and effect relationship. Another study that was done by done by an agency, a healthcare agency in Texas, revealed rates of asthma in the children in the counties where there was a lot of drilling going on. The 8-year-olds were experiencing as high as a 25% rate of asthma, 1 in 4 children suffering from asthma. The overall state rate was 11%. So that's a significant difference. Now, I personally talked to the vice president of the organization and asked, have they made, because this did not come in the form of, aha, look at this. It came more, look at this in terms of drilling. It just came as a finding. And so I talked to him and I said, are there any thoughts about the connection to drilling, that this happens to be in an area where there's gas drilling going on? And he said, oh yeah, we really think it is, but we can't prove it. Nobody has the money to fund the study, so we can't say there's any connection. So again, it comes back to that issue, we don't know. Dish Texas had a survey done. First there was an air quality report that was done, and they found that 16, this is done by the government, that 16 of the compounds that they found in the air exceeded both the short-term and long-term effect screening levels, according to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality Regulations. So they surveyed a small number, 31. 71% of the people reported respiratory ailments. I suspect if I asked here for people to raise their hands if you have a respiratory ailment, it would not be 71% of you that would say you do. 100% of the current smokers reported respiratory ailments. And 61% of the health impacts that were reported by these participants were the known health effects of the chemicals that were detected in the air. In Pavilion, Wyoming, they did a similar study. There, the EPA had done a study showing that there was water well contamination. They did a survey on 16 residents. Again, most of them had not smoked. But again, here we're talking more water than we are air. Small preliminary study, but it did show that there were some problems. So natural gas extraction through this new unconventional drilling presents multiple potential health hazards. And these hazards have been very poorly studied, very few health impact studies done, nothing that has been done where you look at a population before the drilling starts, when the drilling is going on, and afterwards, so that you can actually show the changes. And this might be a very hard thing to accomplish, because when people get sick and they start thinking it's the gas drilling, they move away. Or they make a settlement with a gas company, and then you can't do research because they're not allowed to talk about their health problems. Ooh. And we also know that potential health hazards are compounded if the regulations and laws are not adequately enforced. And that, of course, is a concern. You know, will New York provide adequate oversight of this process to enforce the regulations that they have proposed? So that is the end of my presentation.